Hello, friends. Thanks for joining me. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. You know, I started this new Go show, started reading it in preparation for these videos, and I didn't get past the first couple of pages that a couple of things really jumped out at me. And so I wanted to take the opportunity to talk about them very briefly before we get into this Go show. And the two things that, as you'll see, are talked about, that Nichiren talks about here, are the importance of good influences in our lives. This has always been true. If your associations, whether you call them friends or workmates or classmates or, relatives, siblings, cousins, so on and so forth, if the other voices in your life that are in your environs influence you, and they all do, but the point is, do they influence you in a life-affirming, seek to better yourself, commit yourself to the best behavior, the most fulfilling life, most fulfilling your potential in life? These are what Buddhism or Nichiren would call good friends. But he also points out how rare that is. And there are a great many people in our lives that, for whatever reason, and they don't necessarily wish us harm, but there are people who are so deluded in their attachments and their beliefs in their lives, whether it be magical thinking, nonsense thinking, or adamant views that have a tentative relationship to actual fact, whether you recognize that or not, they still influence you. They drive elements of doubt into us. And in Buddhism, that's simply, it's very black and white. There are good friends, there are evil friends, or bad friends. And some of those evil or bad friends we may actually feel some sentimentality for, some empathy for, and so forth. But this is where we need to check ourselves. It's one thing to have empathy for someone from a place of the Buddhist method, in other words, a place of Buddhahood being accessible to all people. And so having empathy for someone should be based on whether or not they are moving their lives toward their Buddha nature. But if your empathy is open-ended, if your empathy is, you just feel sorry for someone, for instance, then you're giving them, their entity, their influence, room to work on you. And I don't want to sound harsh, however, why would you do that to yourself? If your empathy moves you to encourage them with your influence to be a better person, to exercise greater potential in their lives, to move them slowly toward their own desire for their Buddhahood, their Buddha-ness, then you're acting as a compassionate Buddhist and a Bodhisattva. But if your compassion and your empathy ends with, I can't change anyone, I can't do anything about it, you're actually doing the reverse. You're compounding their own self-determined destruction, and you're allowing that to be an influence on your own. That's the way we are. In samsara, we earthly beings are constantly managing our state, our life condition, and our influences. When we chant Myoho Renge Kyo, when we face this mandala of Gohanzan, we are making the maximal positive influence on our own lives. But more than that, because we do that with our lives, we become, just from the energy in the room, become influences of positivity toward that Buddha nature. What we want to see in our lives is that we attract others who are seeking to do the same. They may not be aware, they may not know it, but they will end up in our environs depending on how deeply we commit to that goal, our resolve. What you will notice over time is as your resolve becomes more determinate and more constant, those negative influences will diminish. You'll find that certain people just won't appear in your environs anymore. They'll fade away. They'll move away. They'll simply disappear. Because their negativity, their muddiness, it will be repelled by your determination, your positivity. You don't even have to say anything. So the people we surround ourselves with is a function of how we are with ourselves. That's important to note. It works the other way too. If you find that all your friends are bad behaviors, negative influences, you should take a good look in the mirror. Because even if you call yourself a Buddhist, if you're surrounded by negative influences and people who have no desire whatsoever to better themselves, there's something in you that you're nurturing that you shouldn't be nurturing. And it's it can be a very alarming feeling. It should send you to Gohanzan. It's tough sometimes, though. But we have different ways of dealing with that, right? Socially, we can start to shun certain influences, or we can start to influence them back and see if they are true friends. If you influence them back from a standpoint of their potential and getting better and not participating in negative behaviors, if they're true friends, they will take your guidance just from your own actions. They will see who you are in a different light, and they may choose to better themselves so they can be around you. That's a true friend. It may not even be that obvious, but you'll see their bad behaviors diminishing. Now that is a lot of responsibility for you, because you have to stay vigilant. You have to stay resolved, determined. And then you will be practicing Buddhism to its fullest. Because as you change, so does your environment. Right? This is all Buddhism. But in a practical way, I want you to understand it. And those that don't want to ameliorate, follow a better path, they'll just fall away. You won't even have to try. Well, try in the sense that you reach out to them for their betterment, and they just disappear. Everything you do is about your attitude, your life condition. As you work determinedly on that, those around you will be affected. Influence works both ways. And so those that are true friends will come around more and eventually ask you questions about what it is you're doing, and you'll have an opportunity to support them. That's the kind of profound responsibility that human beings should always be attaining in their daily lives, right? Without that, what are we? We're just plummeting through this life and not accomplishing anything. We're just waiting for stuff to happen. That's not a life. That's a prison. That's the hell of incessant suffering. So, the relationships we maintain in our lives are a perfect mirror for the relationship we maintain in our life with our own Buddha nature, our own higher potentials, our own true living the life, making the most out of it. So that's one thing that popped out at me, is our relationships. The other is something that I don't think we talk about enough in Buddhism. We just take it for granted that Buddhism is just this other thing that we can practice. And more often than not, people just qualify it as a religion. Here's why it's not a religion. First of all, there are no deities in Buddhism. It's used in a rhetorical manner to discuss influence again in our lives. Belief systems and how they manipulate our mental course in our lives. So yeah, you'll read about the gods of this, the gods of that, but they're not things worshipped. They're not things given over to. Buddhism is always about the state of our mind. That's where everything is. So there's nothing outside yourself that you need follow, listen to, worship. Do you understand? That's the domain of religion. Religion takes everything external as a force upon you. Whether you negotiate it, look for sentimentality from it, are afraid of it, pray to it. Buddhism is all mental. It's all in the mind of you, not others. What others do is up to them. See the influence thing? Further than that, Buddhism asks of you to pay attention. Pay attention to what your mind is doing. When you do that, you start to understand how your life works. You're no longer a victim. You're no longer in the hell of incessant suffering. You are climbing out of it, and you are looking at it, and you're seeing how it is self-directed. Not an easy thing, because it requires vigilance. And what Nichiren says, and you'll hear it as we get into this, is actual proof. What is actual proof? This can be difficult in our modern times. We live in a time where it's blaringly obvious that a great many people choose their truths based on fashion, on the desire to be with a club, a group, a rhetoric. People don't look deeply into what is their actual experience, how it's affecting them. People don't look for what we would call truth anymore. They just label things truth so they don't have to think about them anymore. So it could be confusing to try to understand where someone's coming from, because people adhere or become attached to, well, we call them memes or memetics. Because now people are so attached to words instead of actual meaning that everybody's a slogan. And they live their lives as slogan repeaters. They don't even think deeply enough to know or understand what their actual influence is, what their actual thoughts are doing regarding their life experience. Their life experience is something they put on a shelf, and they've taught themselves to believe that they are the brand name or the mimetic that they espouse. That's who I am. No, it is not. But getting past that can be incredibly difficult and dangerous. As Buddhists, we're committed to actually experiencing and knowing that we're experiencing something fundamental in the nature of our lives and all life. We can't simply, stick a sticker over a certain aspect of life and go, that's that. No. As Buddhists, we know that things change moment to moment. Things are always in a state of flux and change. And so our duty to have a full life and be Buddhists is to be keen observers. And that observation becomes, over time, an awareness that is subject to renewal and redirection constantly. But the point is to be aware, to use our Buddha mind of clarity. That's what all of that rhetoric is about. Become clear as to what's actually happening in your life. When you do that, terms like actual proof have meaning. If all you're doing is floating between mimetics and rhetoric and I believe this, I believe that, without actually investigating it, without calling it to question and looking at it and seeing how it operates in your life, then you can be anything you fashion, because it's not anchored in reality. It's not anchored in actual experience. This is where things like mental conditions like paranoia come from. Delusions, right? Buddha just called them out right. They're delusions. They're based on fallacies. But as I said, we live in a time where this is like incredibly obvious, the fallacies people live under. And they have a lot of influence. Political leaders feed off of it and create their own fallacies. So individuals, groups, communities, and even countries fall under these massive armies of fashion thinking. What shall we call it? They're delusions. And they collect many, many followers. The thing about it's easy for them to collect followers because it takes no effort to believe in delusion. It's a natural state of samsara, you might say. So once again, as Buddhists, we must be vigilant. As soon as we catch ourselves arguing for a truth or a mimetic or whatever, we need to, again, be keen observers of what we're doing. Why is my mind going there? Why am I so emotional about this? Do I have good reason to state the things I'm stating? So it takes effort and courage to really be Buddhist, because it's a constant inventory of what our mind is doing. And thank goodness we have this tool, this method of Myoho Renge Kyo, that we can use anytime to clear our minds. And if it's a really tough situation, we can immediately take it to Guanzan and really train our human mind to become an observer instead of a follower. Right? We've just read that recently. Don't let your mind run your life. You run your mind. That's very profound. It's easy to say, but if you investigate what that really means, that's what it is to be a Buddhist. Right? All right. Enough blah, blah, blah. 3 Tripitaka masters pray for rain. When a tree has been transplanted, though fierce winds may blow, it will not topple if it has a firm stake to hold it up. And see, that's very poetic, but that's exactly what I've just been saying. Especially in our practice, early in our practice, we may be doing things rotely because they succeed. We experience, we feel change in our life. But the Sangha, you and I talking to one another, discussing, studying, this is the firm stake that holds us up when we're feeling the wind buffeting us, the wind of our surroundings, our environments, our relationships. Nichiren goes on, but even if a tree that grows up in place may fall over if its roots are weak. So if you're constantly just rotely doing things without truly understanding or investigating, then an influence in your life that isn't determined to be its highest potential, that maybe even becomes a deterrent to your own practice, has too much influence, can knock you away from your practice. You can go, well, I can take a break. And to be with this friend, and actually, it's a very, very dangerous thing. Even a feeble person will not stumble if those supporting him are strong. But a person of considerable strength, when alone, may fall down on an uneven path. Moreover, had the Buddha not appeared in the world, then, with the exception of the Venerable Shariputra and the Venerable Mahakashyapa, every single person in the major world system would have sunk into the 3 evil paths. But through the strong bonds formed by relying on the Panda Buddha, large numbers of people have attained Buddhahood, even wicked people such as King Ajatashatru or Angulimala, who one would expect could never reach enlightenment, but would invariably fall into the Avicii hell. By encountering a great person, the Buddha Shakyamuni, were able to attain Buddhahood. Therefore, the best way to attain Buddhahood is to encounter a good friend. Thank you for being here. How far can our own wisdom take us? If we have even enough wisdom to distinguish hot from cold, we should seek out a good friend. So this is an argument for Sangha, right? Something Shakyamuni spoke of many times. Although Shakyamuni did say, in the occasion where you can't find a good friend, where you can't construct a Sangha of similarly minded adherence to Buddhist principle, Buddhist self-teaching and determination, if you can't find those for whatever reason where you live or whatever, then the next best thing is to become buried in study, just totally determined to find for yourself. In other words, without friends, you must truly commit your life. This is not an easy path alone. You have to grow those roots deep, right? The tall tree that grows on its own, if it has weak roots, can easily be felled, right? But encountering a good friend is the hardest possible thing to do. Again, all of this rhetoric is surrounding the practice of Buddhism. The influences are on our own mind, our foundation of our life condition. For this reason, the Buddha likened it to the rarity of a one-eyed turtle finding a floating log with a hollow in it the right size to hold him. If you're not familiar with that story, I should have prepared and given you a reference as to where you can find it. But it is in the Gosho. Nichiren uses this story often. I'll let you look that up rather than distracting from this Gosho. In fact, I think there's a Gosho named with the one-eyed turtle in its title, so you can look it up that way. Or to the difficulty of trying to lower a thread from the Brahma heaven and pass it through the eye of a needle on earth. Moreover, in this evil, unlife-affirming, negative latter age, evil, unlife-affirming, negative companions are more numerous than the dust particles that comprise the land, while good friends are fewer than the specks of dirt one can pile on one fingernail. So don't feel like the problem is yours and yours alone. This is just a fact of modern times. People are easily led through marketing. Marketing takes place on the television 24/7, radio, amongst each other, businesses, certainly politics. There's a tremendous amount of influence to turn us into just life forms, just plummeting through life, doing what we're told. That's rampant these days, and the tools are vast and many. Finding truly good friends, in other words, friends that are committed to their own personal growth and positive reinforcement, they're hard to come across. You may end up in a position of training them to be that. Not an easy task. So when you think of taking on a friend or a person, any person, as a student of Buddhism, remember the commitment that you're making. I don't want to shy you away from it, but you need to have the proper respect for that endeavor. It is massive. But it will make your practice grow by leaps and bounds. So be prepared for that earth re-entry, that vibrating hot mass of life. It can be very daunting, as it is exalting and amazing, because you will encounter it if you endeavor to bring other people along in the determined resolve of this practice. And that friend will become a very strong stick holding you up. So as your roots build, so will theirs. It's a dichotomy, right? Bodhisattva, perceiver of the world sounds of Mount Potalaka, acted as a good friend to the boy Good Treasures. But though the Bodhisattva taught him the two doctrines of the specific and perfect teachings, he did not reveal to him the pure and perfect teaching of the Lotus Sutra. Bodhisattva, ever wailing, sold himself as an offering in his quest for a good teacher, whereupon he encountered Bodhisattva Dharmagata, But from the latter he learned only the three doctrines of the connecting, specific, and perfect teachings, and he did not receive instruction in the Lotus Sutra. Shariputra acted as a good friend to a blacksmith and gave him instruction for a period of 90 days, but succeeded only in making him into an Nichantika, or a person of incorrigible disbelief. Purna discoursed on the Buddhist doctrine for the space of an entire summer, but he taught Hinayana doctrines to persons who had the capacity for Mahayana doctrines, and thereby turned them into Hinayana adherents. Thus, even great sages, such as Perceiver of the World Sounds and Dharmagata, were not permitted to preach the Lotus Sutra, and even arhats, who had obtained the fruit of emancipation, such as Shariputra and Purna, were not always able to gauge people's correct capacity. From these examples, you may imagine how inadequate are the scholars of this latter evil age. It is far better to be an evil, unlife-affirming, negative person who learns nothing of Buddhism at all than to put one's resolute mind and conviction in such men who declare that heaven is earth, east is west, or fire is water, or assert that the stars are brighter than the moon, or an anthill higher than Mount Sumeru. In judging the relative merit of Buddhist doctrines, I, Nichiren, believe that the best standards are those of reason and documentary proof. And if even more valuable than reason and documentary proof is the proof of actual fact. So this is what I was saying earlier. What does he mean by actual fact? See, we live in a time now where people will declare actual fact just because they're words that support their delusion. Moreover, how can you know what is actual fact? And I would say to you that actual fact is that which, with an open, clear, resolute mind, looking at your own life, your own mental process, you can analyze your experience and see if it validates what you think of as truth, as fact. Is it an actual fact that the sun is bright and gives off tremendous light that feeds all life on earth? It would be difficult to look at the sun in the sky and the warmth that it puts into your skin, the radiation that you feel, and turn to the people around you and say, the sun is cold. It's cold because it's white like ice, and it freezes everything it touches. Now, there's always going to be somebody who says, yeah, it is cold. Look at it. It's just like ice and snow. And they will go off and preach that to others, and they will create societies, and they will all gather together and worship their snowball sun. It happens. I don't mean to be ridiculous. Things much more ridiculous are going on today. But if you can, with a clear mind, undiluted by these fashionable talking points, whatever, I don't know what we can call them, but they're just wrong. They're incorrect. And you can see that they're incorrect because you stand under that white mass of light in the sky and you feel it. You feel it when it's gone. You feel it when it's present. actual fact, actual experience is the gauge for proof of actual fact. And you can see it in your own life, and the more that you chant, the more that you awaken that clear mind, that undiluted mind, the more and more obvious things will become, like that observation of the sun. But if you let your mind get cloudy, if you let the influences of others say, well, that group does fun things, what's the harm? Your mind will start to slip toward delusion, and you will forget your Buddhist practice. And just that alone should convince you that there's more to Buddhism than magical thinking. In fact, it stands as a great divider from delusion to actual proof. Moving on. In the past, around the 5th year of the Bun-A era, 1268, when the Ezo barbarians rebelled in the east and the Mongol envoys arrived from the west with their demands, I surmised that these events had come about because people did not put a resolute mind and conviction in the correct Buddhist doctrines. I guessed that prayer rituals would surely be performed to subdue the enemy, and that such rituals would be conducted by the priests of the True Word School. Of the 3 countries of India, China, and Japan, I will leave aside India for the moment, but I am certain that Japan, like China, will be undone by the True Word School. The Tripitaka master Shan Wu Wei journeyed to China from India in the reign of Emperor Xuanzong of the Tang dynasty. At that time, there was a great drought, and Shan Wu Wei was ordered to conduct prayers for rain. He succeeded in causing a heavy rain to fall, and as a result, everyone from the emperor on down to the common people was overcome with joy. Shortly thereafter, however, a great wind began to blow, wreaking havoc throughout the land, and the people's enthusiasm quickly paled. During the same reign, the Tripitaka master Kangchi came to China from India. He too prayed for rain, and within the space of 7 days a heavy rain fell, and people rejoiced as they had earlier. But when a great wind of unprecedented violence arose, the ruler concluded that the True Word School was an evil, unlife-affirming, negative, and fearsome doctrine that came near to sending Kangchi back to India. The latter, however, made various excuses and conceived to remain. Again in the same reign, the Tripitaka master Pukung prayed for rain. Within 3 days, a heavy rain fell, producing the same kind of joy as before. But once more a great wind arose, this time with even fiercer than on the other 2 previous occasions, and raged for several weeks before subsiding. How strange were these occurrences! There is not a single person in Japan, whether wise or ignorant, who knows about them. If there is anyone who wishes to find out, that person had better question me in detail and learn about these matters while I'm still alive. Turning to the case of Japan, in the 2nd month of the 1st year of Tencho era, 824, there was a great drought. The great teacher Kobo was requested to pray for rain in Shinsenin garden. But a priest named Shubin came forward and, protesting that he had been a member of the priesthood longer and ranked higher than Kobo, asked that he be allowed to conduct the ritual. Shubin was granted permission and carried out the prayers. On the 7th day, a heavy rain fell, but it fell only on the capital and not in the surrounding countryside. Kobo was then instructed to take over the task of praying, but 7 days went by without any rain falling. then another 7 days, and still another 7 days. Finally, the emperor himself prayed for rain and caused it to fall. But the priest of Toji, Kobo's temple, referred to it as our teacher's rain. One need only consult the records to learn the details. This was one of the greatest frauds ever known in our nation. And in addition, there were the matters of the epidemic that broke out in the spring of the 9th year of Konin era, 818, and of the three-pronged diamond pounder, which were also frauds of a most peculiar kind. These things had best be shared in person. There was a major drought in China in the period of Qin dynasty, but the great teacher Tendai recited the Lotus Sutra, and in no time at all rain began to fall. The ruler and his ministers bowed their heads, and the common people pressed their palms together in reverence. Moreover, the rain was not torrential, nor was it accompanied by wind. It was a soft shower. The Chen ruler sat entranced in the presence of the great teacher, and forgot all about returning to his palace. At that time, he bowed 3 times in acknowledgment to the great teacher. A great drought occurred in Japan in the spring of the 9th year of the Konin era. Emperor Saga ordered Fuyutsugu to send the lower-ranking official Matsuna to the great teacher Dengyo to ask him to offer prayers for rain. The great teacher Dengyo prayed for rain, reciting the Lotus, Golden Light, and Benevolent King's Sutra. And on the 3rd day, thin clouds appeared, and a gentle rain began to fall. The emperor was so overjoyed that he gave permission for the building of a Mahayana ordination platform, the establishment on which had been the most difficult undertaking in Japan. Gomyo, the teacher of the great teacher Dengyo, was a sage and foremost priest in Nara, the southern capital. He and 40 of his disciples joined together in reciting the Benevolent King's Sutra to pray for rain, and 5 days later, rain began to fall. It was certainly splendid that rain fell on the 5th day. But less impressive than if it had fallen on the 3rd day, as in the case of the great teacher Dengyo. Moreover, the rain was very violent, which made Gomyo's performance inferior. From these examples, you may judge how much more inferior were Kobo's efforts to produce rain. Thus, the Lotus Sutra is superior, while the true word school is inferior. And yet, as though deliberately to bring about the ruin of Japan, people these days rely exclusively on the true word. Considering what had happened in the case of the retired Emperor Oki, I believe that if the true word practices were used to try to subdue the Mongols and the Ezo barbarians, Japan would surely be brought to ruin. Therefore, I determined to disregard my own safety and speak out in warning. When I did so, my disciples tried to restrain me, but in view of the way things have turned out, they are probably pleased at my actions. I was able to perceive that what not a single wise man in China or Japan had understood in more than 500 years. When Shanwu Wei, Qin Kang Chi, and Pu Kun prayed for rain, rain fell, but it was accompanied by violent winds. You should consider the reason for this. There are cases of people making rain fall even through the use of non-Buddhist teachings, even those of the Taoists, which are hardly worth discussion, and of course the Buddhist teachings, even if those of the Hinayana are correctly applied. Then how could rain fail to fall? And how much more so if one uses a text such as the Mahavajrayana Sutra, which, though inferior to the Flower Garland and Wisdom Sutras, is still somewhat superior to the Agama Sutras of the Hinayana. Thus rain did indeed fall, but the fact is that it was accompanied by violent winds. It's an indication that both the doctrines being applied were contaminated by grievous errors. And the fact that the great teacher Kobo was unable to make rain fall, although he prayed for 21 days, and that he misappropriated the rain that the emperor had caused to fall and called it his own, indicates that he was even more gravely in error than Shan Wu Wei and the others. But the wildest falsehood of all is what the great teacher Kobo himself recorded when he wrote, quote, "In the spring of the 9th year of the Konin era, when I was praying for an end to the epidemic, the sun came out in the middle of the night," end quote. This is the kind of lie this man was capable of. This matter is one of the most important secrets that is entrusted to my followers. They should quote this passage to drive their opponents to the wall. Setting aside for the moment the question of doctrinal superiority, I simply wish to stress that the matters I have written above are of the utmost importance. They should not be discussed lightly or passed on to others. It is because you have shown yourself to be so sincere that I am calling them to your attention. And what of these admonitions of mine? Because people regard them with suspicion and refuse to heed them, disasters such as those we now face occur. If the Mongols should attack us with great force, I am sure that the teachings of the Lotus Sutra will spread far and wide in this present lifetime. At such a time, those persons who have treated me harshly will have reason to regret. The non-Buddhist teachings of India date from about 800 years before the time of the Buddha. At first, they centered around the 2 deities and the 3 ascetics, but eventually they split into 95 schools. Among the non-Buddhist leaders were many wise men and persons endowed with supernatural powers, but none of them was able to free himself from the sufferings of birth and death. Moreover, the people who gave allegiance to their teachings, whether a resolute mind, determination, or conviction, all ended by falling into the 3 evil paths. When the Buddha appeared in the world, these 95 groups of non-Buddhists conspired with rulers, ministers, and common people of the 16 major states of India, some of them reviling the Buddha, others attacking him or slaying his disciples and lay supporters in incalculable numbers. But the Buddha did not slacken his resolve, for he said, were he to cease preaching the law because of intimidation from others, then all living beings alike would surely fall into hell. He was deeply moved by pity and had no thought of desisting. These non-Buddhist teachers came about through a mistaken reading of the various sutras of the Buddhas who preceded Shakyamuni Buddha. The situation today is much the same. Though many different Buddhist doctrines are being taught in Japan, originally they all derive from the 8 schools, the 9 schools, or the 10 schools. Among the 10 schools, I will set aside for the moment the flower garland and others, because Kobo, Chikaku, and Chisho were deluded as to the relative merits of the true word and Tendai schools. The people of Japan have, in this life, been attacked by a foreign country, and in their next life will fall into the evil paths. And the downfall of China, as well as the fact that its people were destined to fall into the evil paths, also came about through the errors of Shan Wu Wei, Qin Kang Chi, and Pu Kun. And should I pause at this moment? Yeah, I think I will. There's a lot of history in this Go show, obviously, and a lot of accepted folklore, I guess I would call it. These countries, these peoples were guided by a lot of stories that were based on actual events, but romanticized and used politically. So, even though that's the case, Nichiren's not shy about using them because he understands that in using these stories, he can demonstrate the superiority of a clear mind over the delusions of fanciful stories, that even if you look at them for their merits, if you will, in other words, there was actually a drought, and these leaders were asked to do something about it. There was still a certain amount of mysticism, right? engaged in a lot of belief systems throughout Asia, certainly in India. And, although Chinese were more scholarly minded, like with Confucian and Taoism and so forth, there still was a lot of people subjecting themselves to higher powers, as it were. Japan, no different. Different in practice, you might say, but essentially the same kind of deluded thinking. And so even relative amongst those, Nichiren can show a pattern until he gets to the Lotus Sutra, where things happen as they should, where resolve and determination for change is enacted in a reasonable manner. So that's what should your takeaway be of these kinds of stories. Nichiren shifts his teaching styles, as you'll have noticed, depending on who he's addressing with the letters in Gosho. Anyway, we'll have to go further into it for you to expunge as much information, useful data out of these stories. But certainly the first page or so nailed down some very, very serious concepts about how to view our environment, how to view our own mind in light of our environment, how to conduct ourselves as resolute Buddhists. So with that, again, I thank you so much for participating. You're a great assist to my own practice. We're now in the, I can see getting into this fourth book that I have a lot of work to do with typos and that kind of thing. So as I get into it, I'll do some reparations, and this book will then become available with its clarifications. In the meantime, as I am wont to say, with the pandemic being what it is these days, and that'll date this video, but please be vigilant in taking care of your health, as always, not just because of the pandemic, but if you're to live your life at its fullest and attain your Buddha nature, it requires that this life supports you. So please take care of your health, and I will see you in the next one. Namo Myoho Renge Kyo. Take care.